love the royals as well, to buy this because it is a gripping read. And it's not just about the royal family, it's a lot about the BBC and, you know, the institutional cover-up that kind of happened after the Bashir interview. So let's go there. There are a couple of central figures. There's obviously Diana. There's Diana's brother, Charles Spencer. There's Martin Bashir. And then there's also her driver and her private secretary. These are kind of the central figures of this book, I would say. What exactly happened? I mean, everyone wanted that interview. Oprah wanted it. There were lots of more formidable journalists that wanted it at the time. But Martin Bashir, little Martin Bashir, got the interview. What was the lead up to that big interview that is probably one of the most famous in the world?
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, exactly 30 years ago to this day, which explains, you know, the publication of the book today. Yeah, I mean, how did Martin Bashir get it? Someone possibly unkindly said to me that at the time he got the interview, Martin Bashir was not a household name, even in his own household. You know, people who'd been chasing Diana, as you say, Oprah, everybody else. So how did Martin Bashir get her to, you know, say what she said? Well, he was, I think, incredibly skillful in a very dark way. He managed to get, first of all, past her brother, Charles Spencer, by showing Charles Spencer what turned out to be fake documents that purported to show Martin Bashir had great sources, you know, et cetera, et cetera. He managed to get hold of these bank statements that, you know, were proving that some of the staff were taking bungs from the tabloids. This was meant to impress Charles Spencer, and to an extent it did. And so Bashir managed to get, if you like, into the inner sanctum in Kensington Palace. Once he was there, the things he was telling Diana sound utterly bizarre, including the fact that, for instance, all completely fictitious, but Prince Charles, now King Charles, Prince Charles was planning to have Diana murdered. Prince Charles was planning to have Camilla, who's now, of course, the Queen, planning to have her murdered in order to, once they're both murdered, in order to marry the nanny.
Tiggy Legbook, right?
Legbook, exactly. So these were just some of the stories that Bashir was able to get Diana to believe. And you may say to yourself, gosh, I mean, that is incredible. Why would anybody believe that sort of stuff? Put yourself inside Diana's head at that particular moment in history. And in fact, her phone has already been tapped. We know that. Her phone had been tapped. The conversations had been broadcast publicly. Diana was very, very concerned that a person who'd, you know, recently been one of her bodyguards, who she'd had a bit of an affection for, had died in a motorbike accident, and Diana wondered whether that was innocent or not. So Diana was extremely, you know, in a somewhat vulnerable state. But what Bashir was very, very clever at was making Diana particularly frightened about this notion that her husband, Prince Charles, might start a new relationship with the nanny, in which case the two boys then, William and Harry, would be taken away and taken by the nanny. And this was what made Diana so kind of terrified that she was prepared to listen to Martin Bashir and indeed agreed to do the Panorama interview to show Buckingham Palace that she was not going to be pushed around.
You know, Andy, before I read the book, I always thought of Diana as this paranoid type, you know, who was sort of mentally unstable towards her death. But what is actually revealed within these pages is that she was basically psychologically abused by the BBC it really does seem like she was perfectly normal. And you're right, she had some reason to feel a little bit unsure of things. I mean, she was the most photographed woman on the planet at the time, and kind of still remains that to be. But, you know, I do think that the BBC is the one who should be culpable for how she was feeling and how she felt after. I mean, when you go through, obviously, she let go of her driver and her private secretary, who she had very close relationships with, because, you know, they were told that they were part of the dark forces. As you said, you know, she was told that the Queen was going to abdicate 6 months after the interview. These are all lies spun by the BBC. Her husband was planning to leave her. The Camilla murder, of course. The nanny, Tiggy, had, you know, apparently had an abortion, according to these forged documents. And you're right. I think the best lies always have a couple of truths intertwined with them. And that's what Martin Bashir so expertly did in order to try and get this interview. So I think Diana was in a really bad place, but I agree with you. I don't think we should discount the fact that the BBC had a lot to do with this.
I agree. I mean, the word, you know, we've heard, you know, you often hear it with regard to Diana, paranoid. And I always think that's kind of, unfair. I mean, that's like a psychiatric diagnosis. And it seems a bit unfair apart from anything else. You know, if, I put it this way, if, let's say now, if David Attenborough were to come up to you and whisper in your ear that he's heard and he's got evidence that somebody is, you know, they've taken out a contract on you and you're going to be killed, and this is David Attenborough telling you that, then you wouldn't have to be paranoid to maybe take it seriously and take action. I think it's kind of useful. 30 years ago, the interview took place, but let's put this in a modern frame with modern language. And what you've got is a 34-year-old single mum, which is what Diana was at the time, who is targeted by a predatory male who is Martin Bashir, and then she is, if you like, she's groomed, she's gaslighted, she's forced coercively, almost coercively controlled into this position where she will do what he requires her to do. And that is really, I think, the way to explain this Panorama interview. And interestingly, remember that her son, Prince William, has described it. And I think we all of us who can remember maybe 5 years ago, Prince William came on television and said his piece. He used the word, he said, it is not legitimate. The interview was not legitimate. And that's an interesting word. And you say, well, what did he really mean by that? And what he really meant by that was that this is not an interview. It's not an interview. It's a kind of double act. It's a performance. It was something that Martin Bashir had conceived, and unfortunately, you know, was successful in persuading Diana to go along with. And it's a whole can of worms. And of course, the issue arises. That's Martin Bashir. That's what Martin Bashir did, which was clearly deceitful, terrible, very, very bad. You then say to yourself, was there a way of stopping this kind of runaway train that he had set in motion after the interview has gone out? And I firmly believe that, yes, there was. For me, always, the key moment was when his bosses back at the BBC realized that their reporter, he'd commissioned these forged bank statements. He presented them to a member of the public, Charles Spencer.
Yes.
Then, when questioned back at the BBC, Martin Bashir had lied about what he'd done. So that's what BBC bosses knew. They knew that their guy had commissioned forgeries, he'd used them, and he'd lied about it.
And they knew very early on, didn't they, Andy? They really, as early on as 1996, which was the year that the interview took place.
Well, no, we're talking sort of 3, 4, 5 months after the interviews ended in 95. This is sort of March 96.
Yeah.
The point is that I'm perfectly prepared to believe that the BBC bosses did not know the huge gamut of crazy claims, the death plots and all the rest of it. But what they did know was that there'd been forgeries, they'd been used, there'd been lies. And I think at that point you have, if nothing else, a duty of care to go to the people who have been hoaxed and deceived in this way, and you explain to them. You say, look, I'm terribly sorry. We're the BBC. It may sound strange, but somebody working for us has done this. No, they did not do that. And the point that Diana's family to this day find heartbreaking is not just the possibility, but the likelihood that her life would not have followed the tragic course that it did follow had she been briefed on what had been done to her, because it's a result of that interview that she got rid, and you alluded to this earlier, she got rid of the people around her who she had previously trusted. Her private secretary, Patrick Jefferson, her chauffeur, people like that. So her life was on a completely different plane after the interview than it was before. And you say to yourself, well, how thick is that line that takes you from Panorama to Paris, to the tragic crash in Paris? And that line is very thick and very easily defined.
Well, what you portray so poignantly in this book, and you alluded to it a little bit before, is that it is really just about humans, the humans involved. You know, we always think of Princess Diana in this sort of very glossy, sheeny way, but at the end of the day, it's the two sons that got left without a mother because of some of the decisions that were made by the BBC, you could say, allegedly. We're going to get a little bit more into that after this break with Andy.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Well, I'm joined by the great Andy Webb, who wrote this fantastic book. You got to get your hands on it. It's Dianarama. It is an unmissable read, genuinely, especially over the holiday season. I know that, well, I bought an extra copy for my mum today, actually, because I know that she's going to be absolutely enthralled by it. Andy's still with us. My goodness, I was just sort of, those revelations, I was almost taking them in during the break, because it's some mad stuff. And what you said about David Attenborough rings so true, because it's about the trust that was had in the BBC at the time that was completely abused by Martin Bashir. You know, I wouldn't question anything that David Attenborough told me, because he's an authoritative figure and he's never gotten anything wrong. And that's what the BBC was before this interview. And I wish I had all night to talk to you about Lord Dyson and all the other people included, obviously, within the book, but we don't have time for that, unfortunately. What I want to talk about is obviously Matt Weissler, who was sort of almost, would you call him the whistleblower in this situation?
Yeah, that's a fair description, yeah.
So he sort of put two and two together when he was curled up on the couch with his girlfriend watching the interview, and I'm sure he was horrified to almost think, this is what I've done. Now, he tried to send not the exact forged documents, but documents that he had forged in preparation for Bashir. He tried to send that to a producer at the BBC. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, it is a long, complicated story of 30 years.
I do apologise. It's difficult to condense.
Not at all. I just want to try and summarise it. So, of course, Matt Wiesler, really, really nice guy, very, very nice guy, and very helpful, putting the book together. Matt had created these forgeries that the master copy, if you like, had been, of course, sent to Martin Bashir, who needed the forgeries to use them. When you're printing out stuff, sometimes the print isn't quite so good. So Matt had another copy back still in his flat. Now, these he faxed to a colleague at the BBC because he said, look, I think something really, really strange has happened here. What has Martin actually done with these forgeries? So he faxed the copy that he kept, the ones where the printing wasn't quite so great, faxed them to his colleague. And it's from there that the story began to bubble up, if you like, within the BBC. Managers began to hear what had happened, and it's what I find. Shameful. Yes. is the degree to which BBC managers at that point didn't pursue it as they should have done. Because, as I say, where this leads is. Do
you think they basically covered it up? Would you say?
Well, they did, but where it leads is it should have led to Diana. It should have led straight to Diana at that point. They should have said, something terrible's happened. Our reporter has used forgeries. He's done these, and they should have briefed Diana on that. And as I say, again, that is the critical point in this for me.
Correct.
The fact that Bashir had got his interview. In the book, I say, well, let's say that this had been allowed to come out. Let's say that, Diana had been briefed on what had gone down.
Because she was still alive when they knew in the timeline.
Absolutely. Her life,
which is the most damning point, as you say.
It's certainly the most heartbreaking point, because her life at that point had about 18, she was dead in 18 months' time. Had they briefed her, what might have happened? I think this would have happened. And this, her private secretary agrees with this, that Diana probably would have bounced back from this very, very, very quickly. Very quickly, because what's the situation? Well, she has been taken in by this organisation which we're all brought up to trust, the BBC. So she would have actually gained a huge degree of support, I think.
Yes.
Yes, it's embarrassing to have to say, oh my God, what did I do? Why, oh my God, I wish I'd never gone on television and said this. But of course, you were thoroughly conned, you were hoaxed, all that sort of stuff. So she would have bounced back from it very, very quickly. And who, her life, I think, very plausibly, would have followed a different course from the tragic course on which it was set at that point.
So what you're saying is, if the BBC hadn't been so enthralled in all the awards and all the accolades that they were getting off the back of that Panorama interview, and they hadn't covered up what some of them knew at the time, of course they didn't know the full extent to it, but we could still have Diana with us today, potentially.
I think that's perfectly credible, but of course, remember, it's not just the awards and indeed the reputation of the BBC that they were concerned about. They're concerned about their jobs.
Yeah.
They're concerned about their jobs, because had Martin Bashir been outed at that point, well, okay, he's clearly gone, but they're gone as well. I mean, the head of news, indeed the director general of the BBC, I'm very confident they'd have lasted an afternoon.
Well, he eventually then did need to go after many years, when it did get kind of revealed. So no, you're right. I think it's damning to know that is the timeline, and to have that revealed within this book is just sort of, it does make me think, because obviously she didn't have her normal people with her after that. She did become quite confused within the world. I don't think that a drunk man would have been driving her had she had her private security and private protection at the time, which she dismissed because, she'd seen that maybe a lot of those people were with the dark forces, as you say. So I think there's a lot of unanswered, a lot of questions are answered in there, but there were a lot of unanswered questions at the time for Diana.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. And it's, as I say, there can be no certainty in a case like this. But put yourself in the position of Prince William, her son now. He's 43 years old. He's 7 years older than Diana was at the time that she died. So, and William's eldest boy, he's 12. William himself was 13 when the interview went out. So I think I think the position that William is in is this, that he has said, I want questions that I have, legitimate questions that I have to be answered. I want to be convinced that the BBC is not to this day hiding things. And you'll have seen from reading the book that in the course of my research, I became aware that the BBC archives have been weeded. The incriminatory documents have been removed. Now, in that instance, one's going to say, well, is it possible that there are still important documents there that have not been revealed yet, which could tell us more about what happened 30 years ago? Or indeed, were there further documents that have been completely removed and destroyed? I was able to identify 4 documents that had been removed, but only because copies of these documents turned up elsewhere. So maybe it's more than 4. And it's these sorts of questions that for a journalist to be asking these questions is one thing. For a member of Diana's family to be wondering about these sorts of issues is entirely another thing. You don't have to be a prince to feel these human, personal, terribly, heavy questions. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think he was doubly affected by that interview because of, it's a very sensitive time when you're a teenage boy, and the things that Bashir got his mother to say in that interview. I mean, we know that there are rumours of an even potential physical fight that happened after he got back from school because he was so upset with what had happened there. So it's sort of a double whammy, so to speak, where he's been hit by that in his teenage years. And then, as you said, in his 40s and in his 30s to find out the truth behind all that is equally as damning. And, it's quite crazy. You think about the BBC and all their cover-ups. Bashir returned to the BBC. He was actually appointed as the BBC's religious affairs correspondent in 2016 before he had a string of health issues. So it's like they don't learn from any of their mistakes.
Well, that's right. I mean, there are a lot of things in this story in the book that you say you wouldn't make it up. And as you say, they invite Martin Bashir, who again, at this point on his, presumably his employment records, it says, serial liar. Yeah. Who do we invite back to be? It wasn't just religious correspondent. He had a job as editor of religion. So he's kind of in charge of religious output for the BBC. This serial liar. Well, okay, that's an unusual qualification for that sort of job. I think the thing that people say, come on, it happened 30 years ago, it's all done, let's move on. No, the point is that today, this story is very, very much alive because the questions have not been answered. And as I say, it's members of Diana's family who want those questions to be answered. And I think that the BBC, I genuinely, that their attack line, as it were, the press office attack line is nothing to see here. Look, come on.
Well, that's the classic, isn't it? Even just with the recent BBC scandal of Trump suing them for $1 billion because they have just been constantly slapped on the wrist for issues in the past. They haven't actually had sort of money placed in their face and said, this is what actually has to happen when you make these mistakes and when you cover things up like this. So, no, you're right. At the heart of this is a family that's been destroyed by some of the decisions by the BBC and a lack of accountability. I mean, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really would encourage everyone to get Dianarama. It is one of the best things I've read, and you can see that Andy is one of the most brilliant authors and journalists out there. So do buy that for your loved ones this Christmas. And and buy it for yourself because it's just a great read. There you go. Well, after the break, back on the BBC. They've actually been doing more terrible things, but this time to our children. Can it get worse? That after this break.